Oh, you guys have met me before, but my name is Ethan. I am an educator here at the Cheehaw Park and Zoo and the Flint River Aquarium and the Throne-Atiska Heritage Center. It's part of the Artesian Alliance here in Albany, Georgia. Um, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about bioluminescence. And I have titled my presentation for you, Bonkers for Bioluminescence. So let's start by talking about what is bioluminescence. So I have this cool photo of fireflies. Uh, uh, I don't know how good you guys get it down here, but this is what it looks like in Western Pennsylvania, where I grew up. Every single day from about mid-May until the end of August, it looks like this every evening. But yeah.
Okay, when I didn't know if this was a regional thing or just a time thing, but I used to catch those things like so often. And then down here, it's like you hardly ever see them. But
Yeah.
I'm like with you, I used to get jars full of them.
Yeah, all over the place. If you're in the right part of the country, fireflies are basically like it's like the entire field is on fire for 3 months out of the year because of how much light there is happening. So they are, whenever I think of bioluminescence, they are the first thing I think of. But other people might think of other things. So some examples of other creatures that are pretty popular that have bioluminescence are things like some types of earthworm have bioluminescence to them. Anglerfish, they've got that little light on the front of their head that they use to lure prey in. Even some jellyfish have bioluminescence, and some squids do as well. There's a lot of bioluminescence, actually. I'll talk a little bit more about it here, but let's start by just defining bioluminescence here. Bioluminescence, let's break it up into its root words, bio and luminescence, or just lumen, I guess, would be the shortened one. So bio means life, and lumen means light. So it's light. It is light that is produced by living organisms. So aside from all other kinds of energy that animals can produce and other organisms can produce, they also can produce light. And so how bioluminescence has actually been it has evolved over 40 times in on the fossil record and in modern animals. Like 40 completely different creatures have developed bioluminescence, but they all seem to do it pretty much the same way. So they use a chemical reaction that involves a light emitting enzyme that basically whenever another enzyme reaches it and you get it triggers it to light up. That's what it does on a very basic level. It's an enzyme that just whenever another enzyme hits it and reaches it, a very specific other one, it will light up. It's almost like if you were, say, typing code and you wanted your code to light up a light bulb. I don't know, light up a light bulb, but only whenever you push a very specific button out of like 4 buttons. If you push that button, it will light up. That's exactly the same kind of thing that's happening here. So different species and different groups have different luciferins. That's what they're referred to as. That's the name of the enzyme. It's a common name. So it's not specifically what the enzyme is, but just generally what the enzyme does. If the enzyme is a light-emitting enzyme, it's referred to as a luciferin. And then the thing that makes it light up is referred to as the luciferase. So different species and groups have different luciferins, but they are all catalyzed and oxidized by luciferase. So without getting too deep into the chemistry behind it, and I kind of fell down a chemistry rabbit hole here. I'm a really big fan of chemistry, but without getting into like too much of the chemistry, basically what happens is you have this luciferin, and then the luciferase needs to combine with oxygen and make the light happen. Sometimes it requires additional things such as ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. It's an energy carrying enzyme. It moves your energy around inside of your cells. So sometimes it requires additional forms of energy as well. So sometimes it's not just luciferase making luciferin light up using oxygen. Sometimes it's luciferase making luciferin light up with oxygen and other kinds of energy as well. So the big takeaway is that it's a really, really basic, very simple process that just involves taking oxygen and using that oxygen to make an enzyme light up. That's really all you need to know functionally to understand how it works. Now, despite, as I said before, bioluminescence evolving a lot of different times in a lot of different organisms, the same basic mechanics appear in all of them. And that's true from the fungus to plants to animals that all bioluminesce. They all do it essentially the same way, which is kind of crazy. Usually whenever that sort of thing happens, we point to a common ancestor. But in this case, it was just developed several different times in what's known as convergent evolution. They all developed essentially the same system to do a similar function, all separately from one another for different reasons. I mentioned what the recipe already was for bioluminescence. You need a luciferin, a luciferase, and like I said, those are general terms. And then you need oxygen, and sometimes you need some additional form of energy. And if you do it all right, this video is from a news network. It shows waves lighting up because there's a bunch of small bacteria and algae that is lighting up whenever it gets exposed to oxygen. So the oxygen being caused by the waves whenever it's mixing all the water together is making the bacteria glow. So if you watch this here, oh, after the ad, hold on. Give it 1 second here. It'll end. All right. So you'll see it here. There it is. You see him just swimming out. You can see the bioluminescence already forming because he's mixing the water around, which is causing oxygen to combine the two. And then as he surfs, he's making it glow blue, which is pretty wild. So this actually happens off of coasts pretty often. It happens in very specific times of year whenever the bacteria and other small creatures that bioluminesce like this, they make their way closer to the shore. And it makes it glow like that. So that's actually just hundreds of thousands of microorganisms. And you can see it just making all kinds of cool effects there. And that's what it would really look like at night whenever there is no light. It's very cool. I could watch this video all day if I was inclined to. But yeah, you can see actually this demonstrates the chemical process pretty clearly here. It's lighting up whenever oxygen is getting mixed in. So this algae is able to take in a bunch of oxygen and it gives off a ton of light in exchange. So that is how it works functionally. So now let's try to tackle why creatures tend to bioluminesce. Let's figure out why. So why would you produce light? There's a couple reasons. You could be producing light for camouflage, which I know sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but bear with me, I'll explain that one in a minute. You could be producing light as a means of attracting, either say another mate or prey or something like that. You could be doing it for defense. You could be warning ahead of time other creatures of things. You could be communicating through light. You could also be doing things like mimicry and illumination. So I'm going to explain each of these a little bit more here. But the first one I want to talk about is camouflage, because you might think that sounds counterintuitive, right? Why would you light up if you're trying to camouflage? But you can actually mimic some deep sea animals, and bioluminescence appears mostly in deep sea animals. There's a couple examples of land animals and creatures that bioluminesce, but for the most part, it's almost all deep sea creatures, which I think is very interesting because they live in pitch black darkness. So they use light to their advantage for a lot of different reasons. And one of them is actually camouflage. So what I'm about to show you is a video of a firefly squid, and they're called that because they light up, but they will shimmer essentially and glimmer to try to seem like the shimmering of the ocean surface way above. So if you're like looking up and you can see the faint glimmering of the ocean light, it'll look like that. So this is what they look like. And this is a real image, a real video taken. They gather together to mate. So there are a lot of them. Firefly squids look really cool. So actually, the squid has what's known as chromatophores, which are these little colored cells. And their chromatophores actually just have luciferin in them. So whenever they get access to oxygen, they will light themselves up. So that's pretty cool. It's so psychedelic watching these bioluminescent animals. I tried to put in a couple videos here so that we could really get an appreciation for them. But yeah, some creatures like the firefly squid and other small plankton and things like that just kind of float freely will capture the oxygen around them and will use it to shimmer and glow so that they look like the top of the water. So that's how they do it for camouflage. Other animals use it for attraction. So things like courtship. Fireflies use it for courtship to try to attract other fireflies so that they can mate. And click beetles actually also do it. Click beetles, some species of click beetle are bioluminescent. I don't know if any of the ones native to North America are, but there are South American click beetles that are bioluminescent. So as you can see, I have this is a common firefly. There are dozens of species of firefly, and they all kind of function in slightly different ways. Some fireflies just light up a bunch of times in a row. Some fireflies will emit a very slow, long flash. Other fireflies, like the ones that I'm going to show you in this video, are what's known as synchronous fireflies. And they will try to time their lighting up with other fireflies. So it ends up looking like this big wave of light stretching out from a place. So the video I'm going to show you is of synchronous fireflies. And the only thing you're going to see is the fireflies lighting up. So you can see that there's a long period of darkness here because the fireflies have lit up, and then they're all going to start lighting up again, and they're going to try to do it together. And they just did, and then it disappears again. And then if we wait long enough, it'll happen again. But it's really cool to see because if you're in, say, like the forest, and this usually happens in mid to late May, the synchronous fireflies come out. But if you're in, like, say, the Appalachian forest, if you go up into northern Georgia, or if you head over to places like Congaree National Park in South Carolina, synchronous fireflies will light up, and it'll look like literally a wave of light is going from one side of the forest to the other side of the forest. So fireflies are an example of attraction. So the reason why fireflies light up is because the lady fireflies just find it so attractive. They're like, man, that was awesome. So they light up to try to spot each other from a distance. I mean, I guess it makes sense, right? Instead of going around like cicadas make a ton of noise to try to find each other. So they basically scream at each other. Other beetles will do things. Grasshoppers will scratch their legs to make noise. And fireflies, instead of making all that noise, just light up their butts to try to get each other's attention. So the female fireflies will usually sit near the ground, and they'll flash to let the male fireflies who are flying around know that they're ready to mate. And so the male fireflies will come swooping down. And then they will mate, and then they will go fly away. And the male fireflies usually only live for about a year, while some female firefly species live for 2 or 3 years to mate a couple times. But they use their lighting up to attract each other, to get each other's attention. Other organisms use bioluminescence as a means of defense. So they will use it to startle or distract or warn or otherwise mess with predators. There's a lot of squid species that do it. They'll suddenly just flash, and it will make whatever's hunting them down really confused. They won't know what to do. They'll be like, I thought I was hunting a squid, but it just flashed at me, and I don't really know what to do. And another example is a railroad worm larva, which you can find in the American Midwest. They're pretty common in the American Midwest. They look like this in the daytime, but at night, if they feel threatened, they will light themselves up. And each joint has a tiny little light that will light up, which is pretty cool. But a lot of ocean-dwelling creatures will light themselves up to scare away a predator. So if a predator is coming in and it's expecting to eat a squid, but then suddenly the squid flashes, it might get startled or spooked or get convinced that it's not really a squid, and it will try to move on. So another way, instead of just defending yourself in a pinch, you can also use it as a means of warning. Just right off the bat, warn creatures that you shouldn't be eaten. It's believed that on top of mating, fireflies also warn other animals away by flashing. It's one of the reasons why if you're trying to catch a firefly, it might try flashing at you like a bunch to try to warn you that it shouldn't be eaten. And this is actually also fairly common in jellyfish. So these are some bioluminescent jellyfish. And as you can see, they actually are pretty crazy. This video is from the Monterey Bay Aquarium. But they're pretty crazy, these bioluminescent jellyfish. It's very psychedelic. It always reminds me of those carnival rides where like they're flashing the lights down the sides. But these guys will float around in the ocean and just make sure that nobody messes with them. And the way that they'll ensure that nobody messes with them is by flashing these bright lights over and over again. It's very pretty. We'll watch the whole thing. It's a real fun thing to watch. So the way that these guys obviously are pretty specialized, you can see that they have a lot of different colors to them, and they can also sort of move that color up and down. That's actually because their scales, they have tiny little scales on them, these jellyfish do, and these scales basically function like a fiber optic wire. So it will run the light down, and they can sort of wiggle the scales a little bit to make it look like it's a wave, and they'll make that light wiggle alongside them. So basically, these jellyfish have fiber optic wires in them that allow light to move really quickly through them, which is kind of nuts. Jellyfish don't even have brains, but they managed to figure out how to make essentially a fiber optic wire out of their own bodies. Yep, but this is one of the more common ways that bioluminescence is used. It's used as a sort of warning against predators. and other creatures. So another method that, another way that bioluminescence is used is for communication. I couldn't find a great video of creatures using bioluminescence for communication. I mean, fireflies obviously do it, but they do it so that they can attract each other. But there's a special kind of creature called a pyrosome, which is actually a bunch of creatures. It's a bunch of small little creatures called tunicates, which are these basically just really, really small. They don't have to be small, but these ones are pretty small. These really small, very basic organisms. All they do essentially is just suck in water and then take whatever nutrients they can from it and spit it back out. That's all they really do. But some tunicates build these very complex colonies that essentially look like giant worms in the water called pyrosomes. And some of these pyrosomes will use light to communicate. So all of these little tunicates together in this really long tube will rely on light to pass information down. So like if a tunicate in the front feels threatened, like something happened, it got hurt somehow, it will flash a bright light, and the other tunicates around it will flash as well, and it will just spread out as like this big rippling flash of light. Other bacteria can also do this as a method of communication. Some bacteria have been known to light up after infecting dead animal remains. As a means, we don't really know exactly why they do it. It's to communicate something, but it's either to communicate to other creatures that they should stay away, or to encourage creatures to eat it. We don't know. So I guess it's one of those two. I just think it's kind of funny because they're the exact opposite theory. One group of thought is that they use it to try to get predators to show up and eat them, and another train of thought says they use it to ward off predators, and we're not sure which is true. But I did find a great video of a pyrosome, so you can see what I mean whenever I say colonial tunicates. So that is not one organism. That is a bunch of organisms all together, like hundreds of them. And they all sort of latch to each other and just float freely through the water. And they can be huge. They can be massive. But that one was actually a fairly small one as far as what I've seen. Ooh, hold on. I didn't mean to do that. Hold on. Sorry. 1 second here. There we go. So pyrosomes will absolutely, they'll become these massive systems. And so just imagine like one little dot of tunicate lights up and just the rest spreads around and lights up after that. Oh, I don't want to watch it again. Thank you. All right. This might be the most famous example of bioluminescence, or at least to me it was. Whenever I was a kid, I was obsessed with these things. Anglerfish, they use bioluminescence to appear to be something else. So some organisms use it to look like other organisms. Some organisms use it as a means to sort of mimic like a completely different thing. So cookie cutter sharks, if you've ever seen them, they are these weird little like fish-like little sharks that have the reason why they're called cookie cutter sharks is because they grab on, they're parasites. They grab onto animals and then just basically bite a perfect cookie-sized hole out of them before moving on. But they actually have been known to light themselves up, except they will leave one small dark patch near their head to make themselves look like a much smaller fish. So cookie cutter sharks will absolutely use it to camouflage themselves. Some insects will also use mimicry to camouflage themselves and eat male fireflies. So some beetles that look a lot like fireflies will pretend to be lady fireflies and will, use that little light to get the male firefly down, and then they'll just eat the male firefly. So it's a tough life to be a firefly. Anglerfish will make it look like a little piece of plankton, a little piece of bioluminescent plankton, and then these guys will just grab the whole thing and swallow. And they live deep under the ocean. They're very cool. And then finally, I think this is the last thing that we know bioluminescence gets used for is illumination. So some animals, usually deep sea animals, will use it to light up the black void of the deep ocean. It is pitch black down there. So some creatures like this barbled dragonfish here will use it to emit a red glow. And why does that help them? Well, it makes things that are red stand out. And you might not know this about the deep ocean, but a lot of creatures that live in the deep ocean tend to be bright red. And the reason why I think is because the way that light reflects, red light doesn't move as far. So you're a lot better camouflaged if you are red in the water. Or no, red light moves further than all the other ones. So you're more camouflaged because at a certain point, you're only really going to be seeing red. It's one of those two. I don't remember exactly, but a lot of creatures deep under the water are red. So these guys will actually light themselves up as red, and will basically use essentially like a big red flashlight to look for other prey, which I think is kind of crazy. It's a really smart strategy. But a lot of animals that use bioluminescence will use it just to light things up so that they can better spot prey. So we've talked about bioluminescence in animals a lot here, but now let's talk just a little bit about bioluminescence in fungus. So some fungi that grow on decaying wood tend to glow. Actually, you can find glowing fungus here in Georgia, all over the place. Glowing fungus is pretty common all over the world. All you got to do is go out somewhere where it's a little bit damp, where you're going to see a lot of fungus, and go at the right time whenever spores are being released. So actually right about now, depending on the fungus. And look around, and you might see things like glowing wood, like this glowing wood here. The reason why this fungus glows, and a lot of these fungus glow, is not really known. Some people think that it is to attract insects to spread spores, and other ones think that it might be to warn animals not to eat it. We're really not sure, but it's commonly called foxfire or fairy fire, and it occurs in a lot of fungus. A lot of different fungus light up. And you can find them all over the place. They're very common, actually. So speaking of fungus that glows, I want to tell you guys about a cool anecdote that I heard a while ago. At the Battle of Shiloh in 1862, during the Civil War, it was reported by several eyewitnesses, several people, several soldiers reported that their wounds began to glow as the dusk fell. So for a little bit of context, it was the deadliest battle in American history whenever it happened. Now it was only a few weeks later before the next deadliest battle happened, because it was fairly early on in the Civil War and it just kept getting deadlier. But 16,000 plus people were wounded during the battle and 3,000 died. So imagine just like literally a field filled with, it was more like a forest filled with soldiers who are injured and dying and lying on the ground in deep pain from the wounds that they had received. But then as night starts to fall, their wounds start to glow. And what's actually kind of crazy about it is the bacteria that got into their wounds. We sort of pieced together retroactively that the bacteria that got into their wounds, you can still find it around Shiloh. It outcompeted the harmful bacteria and led to a higher survival rate. So bioluminescence in this case was an indicator of survival for these soldiers. It was actually called angel glow whenever it happened, because these soldiers that got the glowing wounds tended to live, whereas soldiers that didn't were more likely to die. So let's talk about how we use bioluminescence nowadays and why, other than the fact that it's just really cool to see glowing animals, why we're learning about it. Well, bioluminescence can be used in biotechnology, and biotechnology is looking at the natural world for inspiration um, to use our our technology of today. So in biology and medicine, for instance, we're using the luciferases and the luciferins as indicator genes to indicate certain gene pathways. So what we're doing is we're looking at which genes do we have that help us to develop limbs, which genes code for a specific color of hair, or which genes make your nose grow whenever you're developing. Like, we're looking at how different gene pathways control different things that happen in your body as you develop. And we have injected luciferins, which are harmless, into animals and figured out where gene pathways go. So like, for instance, we did it with mice, and we made mouse ears and eyes and tails glow, which is kind of crazy. They glow in the dark. We've literally made mice that glow, that light up. We've done it with pigs before. We figured out the pig's nose. We made a pig's nose light up. And actually, this little kitten here, she's lighting up. That was actually done to help figure out gene pathways to combat AIDS. So we've actually used bioluminescence in cats to help us combat AIDS, and they're actively helping us fight AIDS by helping us to understand which gene pathways AIDS affects. So you can thank this little cat for helping us try to solve a huge crisis. Another thing that we're looking at bioluminescence to do is things like alternative sources of energy for light. So the idea goes that if we can figure out a way to harness bioluminescent bacteria, we may be able to replace the need for electrical sources of light by just doing something to stimulate them to light up, or something along those lines. So we would be able to make things light up. Now, we're not there yet. We haven't really figured that out too much, but it's definitely an idea that we've been looking into for the last several years. And as we get better and better at harnessing bioluminescence for things like medical reasons, we'll get better and better at using it for engineering resources too. So don't be surprised if in your lifetime, some towns end up switching from electric street lamps to bioluminescent street lamps. So if bioluminescence is pretty cool, and it developed in a lot of different ways, but we wanted to determine why it developed. We know how it developed, but we don't really know why it developed. And what I could find was there are two real theories for the evolution of bioluminescence, why so many different creatures have evolved to have it. Both of them relate specifically to marine animals, because that's where most of the bioluminescence in animals occurs. So the first theory is that as marine animals got into deeper and darker water, they had to develop new ways to oxidize. They had to develop new ways to create oxidation. So luciferase started as a simple oxidation gene, or a simple oxidation enzyme, sorry. And slowly, as a sort of result of that, it began to light up. And then that lighting up led to increased pressure for that species that developed it to stay lit up, because it was an evolutionary advantage. The other idea, and this one's the one that's more commonly accepted nowadays, because there are a couple holes in the one above, but the other idea is that luciferase in marine animals developed as a way to combat things like hydrogen peroxide and free-floating oxygen ions. And it does basically the same thing that I said here. It oxidizes, but instead of the deeper and darker water being the driving force behind it, it's just the increased acidity and bases in the water that needed oxidized. So, both of them are fairly simple ideas. They both think that luciferase developed as a reaction to needing to cause oxidation. They just think that it's two different ways. But neither explain bioluminescence in terrestrial animals, which I think is kind of interesting, nor does it explain why fungus light up. So anyways, in short, bioluminescence is a very interesting thing that we have observed in a lot of different animals. We understand basically how it works, and we have a couple ideas on why it evolved and the factors behind how animals became bioluminescent. And nowadays, we use it for all kinds of things like medicine, and we're even trying to use it in our modern day technology. So, does anybody have any questions about bioluminescence?
This is so super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really cool.
It's kind of it's one of those things that I think whenever you hear about it first, you're like, oh, okay, it's bioluminescence. It's just things lighting up, right? But then whenever you start to get a little bit deeper into it, it just seems a lot more fascinating.
Yeah. And I was just wondering, as far as the battlefield experience, when has that happened again? Or I actually, if I'd ever heard of that, I don't remember hearing about it.
So the only recorded instance of it happening was at the Battle of Shiloh. And whenever I say recorded, I mean a bunch of the people who fought at the Battle of Shiloh later reported that their wounds glowed. So there isn't like a strong scientific record of this sort of thing. It was more anecdotal. And so for a while, it was just a folk tale. It was something that people told because it was fun to tell. But actually, in the early 2000s, a 17-year-old kid who was at the Battle of Shiloh's site with his mom, he heard the story because it's told at the battlefield pretty regularly. He heard the story and he wanted to find out if it was true. Now, he lived nearby, so his mom was actually his mom studied bioluminescent bacteria for the USDA. So him and his mom went out and collected a bunch of samples of bioluminescent fungus and bacteria from around the Shiloh battle area and determined whether or not any of them could have done what they're claiming it did, which is to say, get into wounds and basically block more harmful bacteria from growing. And it turns out they absolutely could. So because of the specific conditions of Shiloh, because of the weather at Shiloh on that day, it was a very rainy day. The 2 days that the Battle of Shiloh occurred, both of them were very wet and rainy. Because of the weather and because of the climate. And they actually went all the way back and they looked at weather data from 1862 to make sure that everything was right for this to happen. They looked at the weather data, they looked at the organisms that live nearby, and they determined that absolutely this could have been a thing that happened. Now, I don't believe that it was reported anywhere else, though. It's just kind of a cool story for Shiloh.
That is really cool. Man, I must be a deadbeat mom. My kids never discovered anything like that.
Wow. Don't feel too bad. I wasn't doing anything like that at 17 either. Yeah. Any other questions?
Anybody questions? No, but you've given me a really good preface because we're going to be, getting into metabolism and ATP and stuff like that.
Cool. Yeah.
Soon. So this will be really good.
Yeah. Yep. It's caused by metabolic processes. So cool. Well, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and maybe I'll see you next time. Bye.